"Wow, Emily," said James. "What happened here?" "Oh, James, it's all terrible," she explained how her tank ran out of water. "Oh," said James, "that doesn't sound good." "Well," said Rachel, you should have stopped like at a like back at Wellsworth." "That's a fair point," said James. Like me, Rachel, and Toby and Henrietta could have helped you, even if Ethel was there," said James. "I know," said Emily, "or I should have maybe stopped at Crosby when this accident happened with Dodge. Oh, I felt very silly," she said. "Oh well," said James, "we all learn from our mistakes. Like, I think this all got to do with you trying thinking all the fat control is fair and engine. Jin. "I know," said Emily. "Now I felt very silly for doing that. Like, I do remember when you was trying to say you're the favorite engine, Jim, before Thomas took your goods train to the mainland, where you guys got trapped in that steelworks." "I know," said James, "but Thomas did teach me after that lesson," said James, "and I never said anything about who's the favorite never again. And maybe you should do the same thing as well." "You're right. There's no need to be who's the favorite," said Emily. "And you did the right thing listening to Thomas's advice." "See," said James. That's much better. But you gotta go to the steelworks and get that boiler checked." "But how are we gonna get there?" she said. "Me and James are on our way back to Crowens Gate," said Rachel. "And Crowens Gate is near the steamworks. Maybe we could. If not, maybe James could tow you to the steamworks." "That's not a bad idea," said James. But Emily wasn't sure. "Are you sure you'd be able to pull me, James? Like, I may be a big engine, bigger than you. I do have a bigger driving wheel, but you'd be able to pull me?" James smiled at her friend. "I should be, with Rachel behind me. I may not be strong as like Gordon or Henry, but I am gonna try my best." "Very well then," said Emily. With that, they went to sort it out. "And it shouldn't be a hard job, by the way," said James. With that, he and Rachel went off to switch tracks. Meanwhile, Emily's driver uncoupled Emily from the coaches, if that's what James was going to do. James uncoupled from Rachel and switched tracks. Then James buffed up to Emily. Whoops, never mind. Then James pushed Emily and all her coaches just where Rachel was at. They were soon coupled up to Rachel. With that, everything was coupled up, and James pulled Emily, her coaches, and Rachel away. They were making good timing, and James was strong enough to pull Emily, coaches, and Rachel like he did as he went over the viaduct. "Huh," said James. "This is easier than I thought," he said. Emily was surprised how James was strong enough to pull her. Even Rachel was. They were glad James was able to. So was James. He was a bit surprised himself, but was happy to help a friend. They went under bridges as well. Nearly there, said James. At Nafford, but Toby was there when he saw them pulling in. Of course, Emily was pointing at Steamworks, but they decided to stop at Nafford first before they head to the Steamworks. They saw Toby. Well, said Toby. What's going on here then? He said. They explained the whole thing. Toby felt surprised. Well, said Toby, it will teach you a lesson, Emily. Anyways, if you don't mind me asking, I'll offer to take our coaches for you, James. We'll give you some light, and won't tie you out too much. Thanks, Toby, said James. Well, that's what family members are there for, said Toby happily. With that, he went off to get the coaches. While Toby went to uncouple Rachel from the coaches on Emily, James spoke up. How about if I take you to the Steamworks? Said Emily. That's not far. Me and Rachel were heading to Croman's Gate anyway, so that's not far away. I suppose, said Emily. Of course, Rachel's being taken away right now, but I'm sure she will agree to it, said James. Croman's Gate does have the Steamworks, so I can take you there. Well, if you don't have any other jobs to do, not for a moment. Besides, I was strong enough to pull you, the coaches, and Rachel, so I'll be strong enough here as well. Very well then, said Emily, as they waited for Toby to have everything sorted. They waited for Toby to see that he got everything sorted with the coaches and Rachel. Soon Toby came back with Rachel. Here you are, he said. One brake van. Thanks, they said. You're welcome, said Toby, and he uncoupled from Rachel. James told Rachel about he should take Emily to the Steamworks while they were heading back to Croman's Gate. Very well then, James, said Rachel. I think it's a good plan, said Toby. Anyways, you better take Emily to the Steamworks. I'll take her next passage train if that helps. Oops. And I could probably use Harry Net for that help as well. Well, thanks for covering me, said Emily. No problem, said Toby. Thanks for shanking Rachel back, said James. You're welcome, said Toby. With that, James puffed away with Emily and Rachel.